皆さんこんにちは。タッチベースの野村です。毎日コロナの話題で持ちきりですが、やっと緊張感がないと言われていた日本でも少しずつ感染爆発を防ぐために自宅待機をしている人が増えてきている印象を受けます。特に小さい子供のいる家庭は一般の家庭より警戒しているように感じます。さて、ここ数日は東京都の感染者の推移を見守っていますが、25日から27日はそれぞれ約40名、28日は63名と少しずつ感染者の数が増えてきております。数日中に桁が一つ上がらないように願っていますが、自宅待機要請が出てから1週間も経過していないので、もう少し伸びてしまいそうな気がしています。大切なのは2週間後の推移です。経済的な損失は避けられませんが、それよりもまず健康第一に考えましょう。さて、今回のテーマは Working with a Translator、 英語翻訳家と仕事する際に知っておくべき4つのことということで、おなじみのスペンサーとのインタビューの様子を流していきたいと思います。彼は日本語から英語への翻訳を専門的に行っており、僕も過去にプルーフリーディング、構成ですね、をお願いしたことがあります。スペンサーは翻訳者の立場から、僕からは依頼者側の立場から話をし、見えてきた4つのポイントをご紹介していきたいと思います。これまでと同じく英語での配信です。では本編どうぞ。
Yeah, this time translation, I think more of a conversation is a way to go forward because I have a lot of experience as a translator, but obviously I've never contracted anyone to translate Japanese into English because the industry is pretty small. You know, you hear a lot of stories about translation experiences, and I think it tends to be biased. People like to share their horror stories online.
I think what's better is that you may start with some complaints that a lot of translators have.
Sure. Well, by far the biggest complaint that I have heard among translators, and again, like I said, this is a one-sided thing. We haven't heard from you, the client. So the thing I've heard, I mean, a lot of people have weird, sometimes there's very specialized translation, and it can be it gets confusing, with technical language, and it's easy to make mistakes. But even with basic marketing, I've heard, and I've actually had some experience with this myself, that a Japanese client will take the translation that you've done and they'll go back into the document and make their own changes. And they actually make changes that are ungrammatical. They turn your good English, the English that you spent a lot of time on and are a native speaker, and they turn it into sort of Japanese English mix, which is on one thing, well, the client is the client, and once you turn a document in, they can do whatever they want with it. But it creates a big problem because translation is about reputation and trust, and if someone else takes a look at that document that supposedly was translated by you, they're going to see all these mistakes in it, and you're not going to get hired. In many cases, translators are under non-disclosure agreements, so they're not able to share the work that they've done. And sometimes when they are able to share work, it can be flawed.
Going back to what you said earlier, so could you give me some examples of Japanese English things?
Well, so I do a lot of marketing, and Japan's a big tourist economy, so there's a lot of tourism materials that I come across and that I do. I've found in a lot of Japanese marketing, when you look at the Japanese text, there's a lot of nani nani shimashou, right? Or nara dewa, blah blah blah, and you can look at that and say, oh, there's a direct translation that says nara dewa means maybe this is one of a kind, or you can only experience this thing in this place. And shimashou is also, let's do this, like asobimashou or something like that.
Right,
so
right.
You'll see a lot of that. And as an English speaker, as an English audience, in our marketing copy, especially related to tourism, we very rarely say, let's do this.
Right.
Sort of weird to say that, let's enjoy this delicious food, or let's go to the beach. It's just not something that English readers are used to, and they won't respond well to it. You can use the command form. You can say, you must try this, instead of let's eat this, local ebi, whatever, like in English, you might say, you have to try the local ebi. It's so delicious,
Mm-hmm.
but you wouldn't say, let's try it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's a lot of sort of direct translations that don't quite equate into English. And they're all over the place. Those are just two examples. There's many, many more.
Yeah.
But a Japanese client will get the translation back and they'll look at it and they'll see it and they'll say like, oh, well, but this means let's, why didn't you include more let's? And you'll be like, as a translator, you have two choices. You can either say, that's my translation and you can deal with it. Or you can try to like work through them. But what happens when you're communicating with a client like that, it becomes incredibly time consuming because you end up it turns into an extensive English lesson where you have to sort of justify your own actions. And a lot of times translators, need to make money and they don't have the time to sort of work through that with a client. So it becomes very frustrating.
From client side, when I work with some, translators, they may be good at, translating Japanese into English, but they don't really understand what my business is or what my client's business is. Like sometimes like they might have guessed what it means, even though they're not 100% sure. Even though my English is not native level, I can see this is wrong. In this scenario, what would you do? What should I do?
Going off of what you just said, especially when I work for a larger translation company that is sort of gets a huge order and then splits up the project among 15 different freelancers, oftentimes I just get a page of text with no explanation.
Right.
And like so exactly what you say happens is I have to sort of guess like what the project is. And there's usually very little chance for me to sort of reach out and be like, hey, like what is happening here?
Yeah.
And it happens in projects, it happens in business, it happens in tourism too. It can be very sort of panic inducing really when you see that, because you're expected to perform and be correct, but sometimes it's impossible to do that. I think the answer is it goes back to trust. We said earlier, trust is perhaps the most important thing. I think both sides need to invest in cultivating a relationship between client and translator, because it's different than a normal supplier. You're not buying a product that's you get, then you resell the product. That's one kind of relationship. You're really entering a dialogue, because when you're moving something from one language to another, you're actually recreating the product. You're not so much translating as you are creating the whole thing again in another language. At least that's sort of my theory of translation. With that said, and I know money is tight everywhere, but I think it's really important to sort of, if possible, if the translator is based in Japan, meet them in person, even if it means taking a Shinkansen to Osaka or something.
What about video conference instead?
Yeah, video conference can work too. I think, of course, meeting is better because then being in the same room with someone is just so valuable. But a video conference is good too. Phone call, just as much communication as possible, so that you can get onto the same page.
I think from a client's point of view, they don't really mind meeting translators in person or via video conference. But if this project is small enough, maybe translators are not willing to meet clients in person because that's time consuming.
If it is just a one-off, if you have one document, and I would like to hear from you too, but from my perspective, even, forgetting the sort of bonding and becoming friends with your client, even just the technical aspects of establishing how to get paid and the email exchange, if you end up, if the ultimate project, so to speak, ends up being one page, from my end as a translator, it's really not worth it because there's quite a lot of work involved in even getting to there. So in that case, I would suggest maybe going with a larger company that can handle that has that whole system sort of automated, and that has a sales support staff that can just like take care of you.
I'm not really sure if you should go with large companies. Like you said, their process may be automated, but what they may do is that they just pass the document to the translators that they have, and that's it. Like no context, no explanation whatsoever. So in that case, the outcome will be not good quality, I think.
That's true. Yeah, I'm not a fan of big companies. They don't pay very well either. Like on the back end, a lot of their rates are really low. And to tell you the truth, a lot of the larger companies outsource their work to Philippines. So you actually have a non-native speaker translating your work, which isn't good.
That reminds me of another point where when you're creating documents that are for US, you may want to hire translators in the US, or at least translators that have experience in the US.
Yes. It probably won't ruin the whole document, but especially if it's marketing or ad PR, like it will. It needs to be totally perfect for that. An important point there is when you get a piece of work back from someone, show it to a native speaker who's not invested in your project, and ask them what they think of it. Those people will usually give you very honest feedback, and you should believe what they say, because they're impartial. They're not trying to help the translator. They're not trying to help you. So even a colleague, or maybe your old teacher, just someone who would be willing to take a quick look at the work and just verify whether it's good or not. And that's a very, very quick decision. I can look at a document and tell within a minute or two whether or not it's good.
Just out of curiosity, what makes you think this is good copy versus bad translation?
Usually the difference for me is I can immediately tell whether the work was done by a non-native speaker or not by looking at grammar, by looking at sentence structure. A lot of times that's tough to do in English, but just reading it once through, I can tell that it's not done by a native speaker, which is really off-putting for marketing copy. Maybe a business letter you can sort of get by, but for consumer-oriented material. And I have some qualification here, being on both sides, and also I studied writing, and that's sort of my thing. But I think almost anyone who grew up in the United States would be able to identify that pretty quickly. So it doesn't have to be like an expert in your field even. Now, if it's an extremely technical field, that's a different story. Medical, industrial, tech. I've been asked to do projects. I've been asked to do medical projects. Translate this. But when those things come along, I just I decline them, because I always run into terms that I just have no idea.
Yeah, it's really hard to find someone who's willing to do the translation work, who also has solid knowledge in the field. In that case, even though you are trying to find someone, who has experience in the field, you most likely won't find that person. So you have to compromise with someone who's willing to do translation work, but may not have good enough experience in the field.
It's one of the high barriers to the business. In those cases, I would recommend find someone who's very experienced in your target field, say engineering. And if they're simply bilingual, have them do a rough translation. Just get it across, really. Who cares if it's almost unreadable? As long as it goes from Japanese to English, then that's step one. And then once it's in English, then have a science writer or someone who, say, works at a magazine that focuses on engineering, and then have that person work with the English. What you're trying to do is you're trying to combine three very distinct skills into one person, which, as you say, is very, very rare. You're trying to find an expert translator who is, both nearly fluent in English and Japanese. On top of that, you're trying to find a qualified, engineer, which can take years and years and years to develop that kind of expertise. So you're right, that's a very, very rare person, but you can sort of break that up because science writers, meaning writers who work specifically in the fields of science, but present that material to the public or whatever audience, they have a lot of experience working with engineers who are not great writers. So those people are already used to working with sort of indecipherable content, maybe full of equations. They'll be able to pick that apart and turn it into great English.